Nearly every couple at some point struggles with conflict. But not all conflict is inherently counterproductive or damaging. As we discussed last season, some conflict can be productive if done well. But really, when we talk about conflict resolution, we're talking about surface level skills and attitudes to diffuse conflicts that arise. But today what I want to talk about is like digging deeper into what the underlying causes of conflict in serious relationships, and particularly marriages, are. So my hope is that by having a conversation about the root, the underlying causes of conflict, we can equip couples.
It is my pleasure to present Mr. Homemaker.
I am joined for this discussion by my lovely wife, Kristen. Thank you for being here, Kristen.
Thank you.
Aren't you happy to be here? That's your normal thing. I'm happy to be here.
I'm not happy to be here in my safe house in an undisclosed location. But I am happy to be joining you on your podcast, Markus.
Do you want to say anything about the fact that we're recording this remotely because you're on the second business trip in 5 days?
In case you couldn't tell, we're recording this remotely.
Kristen is in a 10-foot by 10-foot unfurnished room.
Yeah, it feels pretty much like prison. No, I'm on a work trip. This is government work, friends. Like, we are saving the taxpayer dollars, staying in real shady.
There's curtains
motels
on the window.
Yeah, there's bars on the other side of it. No, I am on my second work trip. This is definitely like the least glamorous of the places that I usually go. I have been traveling back-to-back trips. I came home for, I think, 27 hours. And now I'm back out and we need to record a podcast. So here we are.
Here we are. All right. So today, while you've been on travel, you and I separately took a Cosmos-style quiz to learn about ourselves. I did. I wrote the whole thing. I get excited. In other words, you and I are beta testing this.
Yeah. I have some wording I'd refined, but I liked it.
Good. Yeah. As yet, not, peer reviewed and validated for its statistical predictive capability, but I'm optimistic that it'll get there. But no, it's a conversation starter. It's like, and as we will unveil, as we will peel back, the questions and context that organized that survey that is going to drive today's conversation and is available to our viewers and listeners in the links below, is connected to the discussions that we've been having throughout season 2 in particular. So for each of those questions and themes, there's a tie back to an episode and a resource and a expert and or a book or an article or whatever that. All right. So I have taken your responses and I've plugged them into the tool along with my own. And through the magic of Excel, it has already identified and color coded and sorted like areas that we have strong agreement, areas that we have strong disagreement that I think will be useful in driving this conversation.
Great.
But first, I want to set the stage for that. I want to make sure that we are coming into that conversation and that our viewers and listeners are approaching their respective conversations with their significant others with a framework for understanding why the drilling into these underlying values and beliefs is beneficial to avoiding. I'm putting an image up right now. All right, share with me your prior experience, knowledge, like the thoughts that this evokes for you.
I don't remember where I saw it before, but it it is basically saying that like there are multiple layers of both communication and like meaning and intent when you communicate. And so you can, like, if you're just focusing on observable behaviors like words and actions, you're missing all of the rest of the meaning that can exist there and the way in which we develop understanding, right? That's things like understanding perspectives and attitudes, and then really the drivers, which are values and beliefs.
Yeah. Well, and I think that what people generally, including couples, fall into the trap of arguing about people's words and actions. And then it gets into a surface level back and forth of, I didn't like something you said or did, and you don't like something I said or did. And nobody slows down long enough to even begin to understand, well, what led you to say that or do that? Mm-hmm. And when those conversations are had, they're normally had just at that middle layer of like explicit conscious thought of like people can articulate, and they're more comfortable sharing, well, I have this perspective, I have this attitude on this issue that we're having a conflict about. But often that is not sufficient to really get to the heart of a problem so that it doesn't keep recurring as a problem. Like you get better understanding at that middle layer, but you don't necessarily have a meeting of the minds. It's just like, okay, now we're going from surface level to now I can understand what's motivating you enough to that I might be able to predict your behavior better, but I don't actually empathize with like your core values and beliefs that are driving all of this. Mm-hmm. And so our prior conversations on Mr. Homemaker have definitely been about that skill set, that sort of like communication and conflict resolution skill set around recognizing and diffusing, or hopefully making something productive out of conflict. But it hasn't gotten into the like, well, what is the root cause? What is the fundamental underlying cause of the conflict? So that's what I wanted to get at in this survey and this discussion today. Yeah. Really what I want to do is I'm not going to go through all the questions. So I think I'll just tell you, there are 5 categories, 5 questions each, 25 total questions. In each category, on any given thing, on any given question, we could disagree 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4. So if we had maximum disagreement on a question, that's 4 points on the scale. So if we disagreed 4 points on everything in a category, that score would be 20. So that's how the math works out. 5 questions per category, 5 categories. Each category has a spectrum of possible disagreement from 0 to 20. Now, we're not going to go through each and every one. What I wanted to do was, first, let's start with some good news. There are a few things about which we have 0 disagreement.
Wow.
Yeah, there's more than 0 things about which we agree.
Yeah. No, I think, so a couple of things like occurred to me as we went through this. One is I'll be interested to talk about our interpretations of questions, how you intended something versus how I took it. Because there's some things where I was like, I'm not sure, like there was like a caveat within it where I was like, yeah, I don't agree with that. I think the other thing is I think we would have been much further apart on a lot of things if we had not done this podcast and like talked about these things.
So I was actually pleasantly surprised at one of them, which is question 15. Marriages are strongest when spouses have clear and complementary roles and responsibilities. And you said you agreed with that. Your agreement with that was very strong. Or what's the exact wording? You agree strongly with that statement. And me too. So we both agree strongly with that statement. Do you want to share any thoughts about like what went through your head when you read that question?
Well, because I think it's about, one, it's like when there's like a pie's worth of things that have to happen. And so it is better if you have complementary roles and therefore you're not both trying to do the same thing. And when we talked about like roles being clear, again, I think it's helpful to know like, and I thought about this more, I guess, in terms of like day to day and week to week, like tasks. So if we're not like, well, are you getting the kids? Am I getting the kids? Are we negotiating? Like whose job is what? I think that it just reduces from the get-go, like any conflict that you like, unnecessary conflict. Like we just kind of say, you're really good at these things. I'm really good at these things. Some of these things both of us hate to do. Let's figure out a way that we kind of do, get those things done. And it just makes it a little bit more streamlined if you can put those things together. And if you can do it in a way where like your skill sets complement one another, then all the better. One of the places that I've come from is I don't agree with gender roles in the purely like we have stereotyped the way men and women should behave, but I do believe in spousal roles or in any relationship, right? Like discussing, assessing, and understanding each other's strengths and weaknesses and figuring out where those things, like how those things fit together to be successful. So like stereotypes like typically mean like there is some level of truth to it. So it may turn out in your house that as the woman, you are the person that like you have the characteristics and the you enjoy or like cooking, cleaning, that kind of stuff. Like maybe you're a very scheduled person. You're good with like making sure kids get everywhere. And so, or maybe your husband's really handy, but maybe it's not. And so I don't want roles to be because you're a man, I'm a woman, this is what we do. But it's like, what is the right fit for each of you? And so it was actually really interesting. I watched a little clip the other day. It was a very old interview where Barbara Walters is interviewing Dolly Parton, and it's like really resonated with me. So Barbara Walters was asking her, like, you're a very successful woman. You are very talented. Like, you don't have to do this. You don't why do you wear like your big blonde hair? Why do you wear so much makeup? Like you don't need to like be this way to like attract attention. And she basically said like, I am very comfortable in my skin and who I am. And I like enjoy like my hair this way and my makeup this way. And I do it not because I think it's like what people want for attention, but because it's what makes me feel good. And I feel similarly, like I can tend to in many ways fall into some traditional female roles because I like it, not because someone told me you're the woman and you have to do this, but because like I enjoy being nurturing and loving and emotionally vulnerable with our children. And I enjoy cooking and, housekeeping to some extent. But so it was really like, to me, it's like, I don't think we should tell people what to do because you're a boy and you're a girl, but I think we should certainly have roles and understand that you want someone who's complementary to your own skill sets.
I love it. Like 90%. I love it. All right.
I could not love it more, except maybe like 50% of what you said. I could love.
I could build on it. I could improve on it. Yeah. Another one I was pleased to see that we had total perfect alignment on was each person should balance their own career and their relationships with their family to maximize their own happiness. And you and I both gave that a 1, meaning we mostly disagree with it.
Yeah. I feel like we want to like the goal is not personal happiness once you get married. I mean, if you can both have personal happiness, and I hope you do find that in your marriage, but it's more about, I think, shared harmony and shared happiness. But if you look at it as a me or you, it's like an us versus them. It's an either or. And I don't think that's healthy. I don't think it's like, I think if you're looking at it from a like personal happiness perspective, that by nature sets you up in kind of a selfish mindset as opposed to a collective happiness. I think it's kind of like what Greg was talking about in the last episode that we did about, the like whole, like, living your life early on, like as a single person, but recognizing that when you make that switch into being married and to having children, like that becomes your priority. And it's not about your individual happiness. Like, I want to go to the Red Sox game, so I'm going to go because that's what I want to do. It's about like, how do I, like, it's not to say you'll never get to go to a game, but it's how do we focus on the collective unit rather than individual.
Okay. Now let's get in. Now that we got sort of the practice, now let's get into the juicy disagreements. All right.
All right.
Question number 9. Each individual should make the life choices that guard their independence and strengthen their self-reliance. You said you mostly agree with that. And I said, I disagree strongly.
Okay, so here's why. I already know why. Because so part of this was I was reading this on a plane on a very small phone. So I was like having to scroll back and forth. And so I was thinking, like, I had actually just been reading White House Warriors. So I was thinking in a like American society mind frame of like, you should like be able to be independent and self-reliant. Like, this is like my emergency manager, like, hey, we're not showing up for 72 hours. You got to be able to take care of yourself. And that's where I agree. But if you're talking about it in the sense of like husbands and wives, like, you should make life choices that guard your independence and strengthen your self-reliance, I give it like a 1. Like, I think that you should. So you give it a 1
if you're married, but what do you give it if you're talking to a 25-year-old?
I give it a 3.
Who's not married? 3. You go back to a 3.
Yeah, because I think like part of it is like, I think that it's like a very similar theme to what I was just talking about of like, I don't want to, I am against gender roles when somebody tells you that this is the way you should be. Like, similarly, I think that if you like being a young woman, I spent my early years making sure that I didn't have to rely on anyone, that I could choose to rely on someone and I could choose to make a relationship. But I didn't want to be like, you know what? I'm not going to go to college and I'm not going to pursue any type of career. I just am looking for my, what do they say? Like, looking for your like MD or marriage diploma or
your
like,
MRS degree.
MRS degree. Right. Like, and so like that, like, I feel like I have confidence in our like as an individual in our relationship, because I know that while like I do not want to do things on my own, like, I am a whole person and I could independently take care of myself financially, like, you know, in the ways that you need, like my physical well-being, like my security. I'm much better at it with you, but like knowing that I can be my own person was very important to me going into a relationship. And I feel like people sometimes who go into a relationship that aren't able to like promote their independence and self-reliance can get sucked up in relationships in a way that makes them more dependent on the other person. And I think that's a bad way to start out. But I do think that once you enter a relationship, you can allow yourself to be more vulnerable, but it is easier and more practical to do that, knowing that like if everything went south, like I could take care of myself. And everything went south could not just be like we break up. It could be like your spouse dies. Like, are you able to be self-reliant? And I think that is, I think it's a good idea.
Yeah, I think that there's a real risk with like underestimating the unintended consequences of that mindset. And it goes back to what Greg said and like your sort of agreement with Greg about the like, you know, use your early and mid 20s to like be your own person and, you know, figure out who you are and like make bad choices. I don't think he said that exactly, but like I read that into it. Right. But like, you know, he did say like, be selfish, you know.
I don't think it's about make bad choices. I think Yeah, I think that one thing that really so like you have brought me along on a lot of things in the past couple of seasons, and I'm like, oh, okay, I can see it that way. I don't think you're ever going to win me over to this, because I think that you have this negative vision of something that I don't think is. I think could be a lot of positives around, and I think it's not about being irresponsible. I think it's about the opportunity to take chances. And chances that you are less likely to take when you have a family that is dependent upon you, but that like may be the right choice for you as a young person, and maybe taking those chances early on pays off for you in your longer term relationship. And so I do, I look at it more in that realm than like, going out and partying, but like, like, do you want to go be a foreign service officer and live in Africa? Like, you're not doing that with a husband and kids. Like, go do it and try it. And,
Yeah. No, I think the foreign service officer thing, like that resonates with me. Like, yeah, if you think you might want to do that for a while, then do that before you settle down. That makes sense. I think if you think you might want to be in the military for a few years, but probably not the rest of your life, then it makes sense to do that before you settle down. Although if you're going to do that for the rest of your life, then that doesn't make sense, right? Then you just have to find somebody who's going to be willing to go along with that lifestyle. I think if you're going to be a Gary Vaynerchuk style entrepreneur, it makes sense to spend 5 or 6 or 8 years like just hustling and like eating ramen noodles to like pursue your dream, and either like iterate on that until you're ready to like do it in a way that is compatible with marriage and family life, or you, like you say, like you become Zuckerberg and you're like, well, now I can get married because I'm a billionaire. Those kinds of life paths, I think, could justify the like postpone marriage and family life, because there are high risk things that are, it's easier to travel fast and like be agile and adapt to situations and seize opportunities when you're traveling alone.
Right.
Like that makes sense. But it's one of these things where then people use that scenario, that rationale, to rationalize, like, well, they're not doing any of those things we just said. They're not doing high risk stuff. They're not like pursuing some dream that would be a lot more difficult to pursue with a wife and kids. They're just like hanging out and like blowing their money on frivolous stuff and just delaying responsibility. And they're just extending their college years through their 20s of being like, yeah, I go to class, and I used to go to class before I met up at the bar, and now I go to a job before I go meet up at the bar. I'm not doing anything useful with this time. I'm just blowing it. And like, I don't think that like the foreign service officer scenario justifies like the average person who is not spending 5 years being a foreign service officer.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're probably in alignment. Like, I wouldn't be super supportive of our kids just being like, I just gonna like do drugs and work, right? Like, that's just not a thing. But I feel very similarly, and this might be controversial, but like people who also believe like, I got to get my kid into like a private high school or the best college because like I want them to have this like crazy, amazing career. And it's like, again, like that doesn't really bear out. Like, do people who get to elite places in life many of them do go to like higher end schools, but there's 99% of the rest of the people who like are doing regular jobs today, right? Like, you're like nowhere further along.
Right.
And I feel like people have this like perception in their brain. It's like, well, that's not reality, like that's not getting you anywhere. And so I think, or where you think you want to go, and was that sacrifice financially like worth it? For a lot of people, it does not pay off. It's like, great, know? And so I think, I do agree with you there. But I think that there are a lot more people that are like, maybe like, I want to be like on Wall Street. I want to be a trader. I have and sometimes it takes people a little while to realize like, hey, like that's not actually going to be a dream. That's a reality. But for a lot of people, it ends up being a reality. And I think it's important to like recognize when the life that you're going, if you are choosing a life that you think may not be compatible with being married, like you should be honest with yourself about, or at that time, you should be honest with yourself. I thought Greg's point about like, early on you're hustling and you're trying to do all this stuff. I say all the time, like when people ask like, what's your, what would be your recommendation for women who want to have children? One of the things that I think makes it a lot easier, and I'm not saying this is the only way to do it, but having worked in your organization for a number of years and built the goodwill there is critical to, I think, successfully raising children, because it's very like, I felt no guilt going out on my maternity leave because I've worked for my organization for 11 years. I knew I put in a lot of time and a lot of hours, but if I just started a new job, I think I would have been trying to like cut short my maternity leave. I would have been like, I don't want them to think that I'm, a slacker. And so I think similarly, like build up that goodwill early on, like do the hard work, take the tough jobs, deploy with your job if that's an opportunity. But I think it's important to help kind of get yourself further along so that you have the goodwill and grace from your organization down the road when because I have stepped back a little bit, and I think I have bosses that like have seen me really hard charge and understand the kind of ebbs and flows and are willing to be more flexible because of it.
As usual, like I think and part of this exercise is like zeroing in on areas of disagreement and like really trying to like probe those. But at the same time, I think that when we really step back and like let the dust settle, I don't think we're as far apart as like the sort of process makes it seem. Like I think there's a lot of validity to what you're saying. Again, I think it's just like one of those like, which you've already acknowledged, so I'm not trying to get you to repeat yourself, but oftentimes I think people use scenarios and like thought processes that in some sliver of, the bell curve, some exceptional set of exceptions, then they're like, well, because I can like articulate a scenario where this would make sense, now I can do that thing, even though I'm not in that scenario. And
right.
That's where I get frustrated. Now, the sort of another thing, and then we can move on, is I do think there's also a self-fulfilling prophecy of like lowering the bar. And I think I think people will rise to a challenge, and I think they'll also lower their aspirations. If your expectations of people are low, they'll be like, oh, I will happily lower my expectations of myself. And if you tell people like, hey, you got to get your life together if you're intending to at some point like start a family, you need to start thinking that way and acting that way and being responsible. Start saving your money. Start like, if you're going to hustle so that you're like more financially secure, then work toward financial security, not hustle so you can blow your money. And like, if you want to settle down, start looking for a suitable spouse and not like just start like looking for people to hook up with at the club, right? Like you can't just say like make a lot of bad choices and then at some point make a 90-degree turn and start making good choices. Like if you're trying to get to a good place, start making good choices now, cultivate the lifestyle that will prepare you to be effective in your actual long-term goal for yourself. But I don't think that's the message that like for the past 2 generations has been given to high schoolers, college kids, and people in their 20s was not like, hey, there's a high expectation, like, and you're being given a lot of opportunities. You better make the most of them. It's like, hey, you're being given a lot of opportunities, so no pressure because this is going to be really easy. Just you can kind of just like coast for 10 years from 18 to 28, and then you should start thinking seriously about being an adult. And that's what frustrates me is the like self-fulfilling, like, yeah, just like take the pressure off. Just like worry about yourself at 28 the way you did at 18. And I just think that is the irrational, unjustifiable irresponsibility of it all. Well, and then the last thing I'll say, I can just tell you, like let me wait until I run out of steam. But like, but the last thing I'll say is, I do think there's also like you build a bad habit, even if you're not like making bad choices, even if you're not like really frivolously. I'm not saying like crazy stuff. And I'm not saying everybody who doesn't get married at 23 is like a crazy person. That's not the like, I feel like I'm being set up to like be caricatured in that way. But what I am saying is you develop habits in your young adulthood, and you can either be developing habits of mind and lifestyle that will be conducive to being married and having a family, even if you don't yet, even if you're consciously saying, like Greg said, or like Gary Vaynerchuk might say, like, hey man, if you're 23, this is a great time for you to take big risks. Don't like take on responsibilities that are going to constrain you. This is the time to like live in somebody's basement, eat ramen noodles, and like try to start a business. It's going to be a lot harder to do with like an infant, you know?
Right.
That makes 100% sense. But that person who's like being the entrepreneur isn't necessarily building bad habits of just like being selfish, because they're like in a deep ascetic state. They're like scrimping and saving and like putting everything they can into a business, which means that they're used to like denying themselves like frivolous, wasteful comforts or distractions or whatever.
Right.
And like that ability to like deny yourself, like to make long-term choices and long-term investments and like forego, you know, a night out 3 nights a week, like, so that entrepreneurial life in a way like sets you up for just like being a foreign service officer, being in the military. Like, there's all these things that we're saying are virtuous and like rational to do in your early mid-20s. In a way, they all set you up to be an effective and successful spouse and parent. But again, I don't think that's what most people do. Most people aren't doing those things that are developing strong habits. Most people are developing habits of selfishness because they spend a decade only worried about themselves, just doing whatever they want, just like following their whims.
Yeah.
The only other area that you and I had the same level of disagreement, question 11. The best gift a parent can give to a child is to prepare and encourage them to leave the nest and build their own life as an adult. You said that you agree strongly, and I said I mostly disagree.
Okay, why don't you tell me why you disagree with that? So, well, let me just say this.
Yeah.
So the best gift a parent can give to a child is to prepare and encourage them to leave the nest and build their own life as an adult. Like,
right.
I think I take that as like, that is our job, right? Is to help our children to develop the ability to reason and make decisions on their own so that they can, like, so that they are able to be self-sufficient enough and know how to make right choices on their own, because I'm not going to make their decision for them forever, right? So creating people that can like go off and become the next, like, and become adults that are successful. I think that's a huge part of our responsibility. Caveat, but I would love nothing more than for all of my children to then choose to fly back into my nest and stay with me forever.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, I think like the tension that you're acknowledging is what I'm getting at. Like, I don't feel that obligation to be like, you should go off and do your own thing. But I secretly just want you to not go off and do your own thing. I want you to like be close in and tight to the family. I think that the close in and tight to the family, like we are a family enterprise. That should be the explicit goal. The explicit goal is that we are not, a family is not a place where you prepare to send people off to be individuals independent from the family. A family like doesn't end when a person turns 18. And I think that there's this like this concept of like, well, my job is to get you to 18 and for you to be independent.
No.
18, and I'm out.
And you asked that in a different question, and the 18 thing, right. And I highly disagreed with that. So that's not what this is about.
Yeah.
I'm not saying like your job is to be like, and then like go off and we'll see you on holidays. Like, I'm saying that it is their ability to like be responsible for their own lives. And I hope that they choose and that we have fostered a family relationship where they choose to spend a significant amount of their adult life in proximity to us. But so like I think we're kind of again.
I would take that a step further. Yeah. But let me like before we agree that we are mostly aligned, but like before we come back together, let's agree. Let's focus more on how we're disagreeing. Like I mean, so one of my. One of the influential people that I listened to, they made the statement, and they were consciously trying to like make a bold statement. And they were saying it should be the goal of every married couple for their child all their children to get married and settle down in the same community that they themselves live. That should be the goal. That should be the success criteria of you are a successful parent if your child is a member of your community forever. And their argument was, if you have the mindset that when your child's an adult, they need to get out of your community, then you either shouldn't live there because there's apparently something wrong that you don't think it's a desirable place to be, or you have a toxic attitude toward your own children. Like, you should want them to be near you, and you should explicitly encourage them to be near in to family, because not just you as a parent, but like, because we, for example, have 3 kids. If all 3 of our kids settle down in the same town we're in, then even when we're gone, they will have each other. Mm-hmm. But if our goal is to like throw them to the winds and like go in 3 different directions, then they will all, as soon as we do that, they're alone, and they'll be alone forever. And so like a healthy family would be one that cultivates connections that are enduring. And part of that is geographic. So that was one aspect of their argument. Let me say one more, and then I want your reaction. But similarly, they said there's like this myth today of like you're going to find the one who's like perfect for you by like casting a net of like a nationwide or global dating website.
Yeah.
Or you're going to meet them backpacking across Europe or at Machu Picchu or like some other like super bougie upper middle class like college summer destination. Like, that's the theory now. And the reality, this person was articulating, I mean, like, there's no rational basis to draw that conclusion, because as we've discussed, going back to like the 80-80 marriage, is all you're doing is increasing the likelihood that whoever it is that you fall for is somebody who you have very little in common with. And you're setting yourself up for a series of conflicts about where are you going to settle down, how are you going to raise your kids, which family you're going to be closer to. And all of those things would be resolved, or they'd be non-problems if you just focused your attention on like, well, this is my community or my area that I grew up, and I want to settle down, which is something Greg said, of like, if you can, look for somebody who's from the same place you are. Like, there's no reason to subject yourself to this tension and conflict over where are we going to be for the holidays and where are we going to settle down. Like, just settle down with somebody who's from the same place, that grew up in the same place that you did, and all this is solved.
Right.
What are your thoughts?
I mean, a couple of things. Like, one, I can't more wholeheartedly reject this, because like it would mean that Greg would not be married to Kristen and you would not be married to me, right? Like, and I think I knew someone that I was good friends with who did this, where she was like, I'm not going to get married. I'm not going to meet the right person until XYZ. And that's like not the approach I took at all, which was, I was like, I'll meet the right person when I meet the right person. And at that time, I'll make the decision about my life and where I am. So like, had I met you earlier on, like my career path may have taken a different trajectory, right? Like I may have made different choices. But
well, I mean, we've said that if we'd met earlier on, we would have just hated each other. So there's that too.
Right. Like we wouldn't have been where we are now. Like we were very different. Like you and your like,
we met at a time that we were compatible. We were not always compatible. Yeah.
No, right. And so like, I think, so part of me is like, when you say things like this, I'm like that's rejecting, like, that's like basically saying that like our relationship is not, is false or faulty. And so that's part of me.
No,
like,
but see, like, I think that's a false. Yeah. So I get that. But I'd also like, I think we have to actually guard against what you're suggesting. Because what you're suggesting is that like we have either some obligation or we should like rationalize and defend the decisions that we've made individually or as a couple by encouraging our children to make the same choices we did.
No, like, what I'm saying
there's tons of choices that I have made or that we've made, and I don't like stay up at night like second guessing those choices. But if I had it to do over again, or if I were like talking to our kids through like whether to go to a private school or a state school or what to major in, I'd be like, well, I made those choices and I don't like lose sleep over it. But knowing what I know today, I'd be like, hey, you know what I didn't know when I was 18 that I think would help you make a better choice than I did? It was like, da, 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 da. And I don't feel like
Yeah, but
that's
so do you think you're gonna have
hypocritical.
do you think you're gonna have the conversation with our children that like, so like I like I had a choice to make, and would I do it differently? So I recommend that you meet someone in your hometown, because I probably would have done that if I had gone back. Like, we're gonna tell our kids like you thought you picked the wrong person, like that. Like, you can't.
Well, no, think about it this way. Like we've said it a dozen times of neither of us fully appreciated like how challenging it would be to raise our kids without the benefit of like having a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle down the street.
Right.
Like so many people who are like our peer group make it all work, do the 2 careers and juggling kids thing by like, oh yeah, 2 days a week, like my parents pick the kids up from school, or
Yeah.
I don't need to get a babysitter because I could just drop the kids off at my mom's house when I go out on a date with my wife. Like we
Right.
don't have any of that support. And we've acknowledged like, oh yeah, that's a big cost. And like, if you and I had like, if you and I traveled back in time 10 years, we might be like, hey, let's like really make some choices in a way that optimizes for the support we're going to get as parents and like the family connection our children are going to have growing up. That, like, again, I think we made rational choices as they presented themselves, but it's just one of those things like, yeah, like if I had it to do over again, I would have rethought that. And like talking to our own children, I do think that I would say like, hey, not that we don't love where we live and like that our community and our friends and all these things, but you should think long and hard about the costs associated with randomly putting a pin in the map and being like, I'm going to raise my family here. Like there's going to be costs to that.
Yeah, I do think there's also costs though to just going with what you have known and like coming back to like the place you grew up, right? I think I think there's a natural human tendency to want to explore and to try new things and I do worry that the flip side is that like if I had like been like, no, I just like stay where I grew up, I think I would have this like wanderlust of like did I make the right, like I have no doubt in my mind that like I've made the right choices in terms of like
Yeah.
who I married, like what I'm doing with my career, like where we're raising our children. Like I think that, and so I feel like I would be doubting myself a lot if I was like if I hadn't left, if I was like, oh no, like I just go back to where I'm from. Like some people that is like a very clear and comfortable, like I'm like excited to go back to where I came from. There's a lot of reasons we did not choose that, whether it's it is very I think that the amount it costs to live where I grew up compared to the benefits of living there, I think it's not. Whereas I feel like the cost of where we live with the benefits that comes along with it, short of like us being away from our family, I feel like that is I wouldn't trade. And I think we made the right choice. And so I do, I do reject the geographic proximity and that's a failure in parenting. Like, I feel like my parents, I'm just going to use them anecdotally, right? Like, I feel like my parents raised 3 very strong, independent women, all of whom have very strong ties back to our family. And we prioritize that time together. But we all went off and did different things. And by the way, I could not have the career that I have today if I had stayed where I was. Like I had to go to Washington, D.C. And like that has changed the trajectory of my life in a way that I think is very positive. So I don't yes, I would. I want our children to know, I want to live in a place that our children want to be. And I want our children to know that I want to be with them. And I hope that I raise them in such a way that they feel that too. But I don't think that it's to go that final step and say that success is if everybody comes back to be near each other. Like, I think people you are a complex and whole person. And there are other reasons that might drive you to other locations. And I don't think that's a failure of a familial relationship.
I guess we're going to have to agree to disagree. This is one of our biggest areas of disagreement.
I significantly
For
disagree.
now, just
Absolutely.
acknowledge it.
Thank you to our patrons who make the Mr. Homemaker podcast possible, particularly Barbara, Colin, Heather, Cassandra, Mary Jo and Paul, and Ted. Thanks to your support, Mr. Homemaker has donated to Mississippi's Gulf Coast Center for Nonviolence, with a mission to support and serve victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. To help us reach more couples trying to navigate these challenging times, please like, subscribe, and share this podcast and YouTube channel with your significant other, relatives, and friends. Don't just focus on, like, you should, like, look at things you are aligned with, but then you should explain, like, oh, like, yeah, when I was thinking about that, I thought about this. Because then you might be like, oh, like, that's not why I gave it that rating. I actually gave it that rating because of this. And so I think what it is it's like, take each question and talk through them together. You might, like, quickly find, like, something that you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. We know that. But you really don't, you don't want to just be like, okay, let's just go to our top 5 and our bottom 3. Because I think you lose a lot of the important nuance in all the questions that are, like, because again, this isn't like, do you want kids or do you not want kids? This is like, what do you think the purpose of our lives should be?
I think it was the book Conflicted where he discusses that a lot of conflict is the result of outdated models you have about your significant other. And like you build an assumption and like you validate it in your own mind over time, but actually it can like drift away from reality. And you have to periodically like consciously re-examine or reevaluate, like, do I actually understand how Kristen thinks about that? And like, let's have an explicit conversation so I can be like, oh, I just always assumed you thought this about it. Now that we're having this conversation, I realize we've grown in our understanding of each other over 10 years, but even more so in the last year and a half of this sort of like conscious effort. And like these kinds of conversations are the things that have helped us get there. And so I would hope that younger couples can like accelerate that process in their relationship and like get to a place of understanding and an agreement to, like, you know, cultivate a healthy relationship faster and better and earlier than we did.
You know, going back to what we talked about early on and the iceberg model of, you know, if you're only seeing above the surface, like you don't really understand what's going on. I think that like there's many examples today of when Markus and I were going through this. And if I were just to read how I interpreted the questions that we talked through and what I interpreted Markus's belief to be, like a couple of things. One, you have to really, I mean, as you go through your relationship, you'll get to know each other really well. And that's why these conversations are really helpful and interesting, because there were a lot of things that, because I know Markus's value system and beliefs, I could see those questions in a different way and understand a little bit more as to why he would feel a certain way. But even though we've been together now for over 10 years, there were still like assumptions that I made that until I asked and we talked through it, like I didn't realize a particular perspective or why you held a particular attitude, you know, within those questions. So I think you will get to know each other more and more. And as that unfolds, you'll start to notice that the way in which you interpret those questions is shaped by the way your partner, you know, the conversations that you've had. But that like, there's always more to learn and you're always going to go a little bit deeper. So we talked about in like one of our early podcasts about like, seek first to understand before being understood. And I think this is yet another example of, you know, make sure you're really taking the time to listen and question and understand your partner before you make an assumption on why they believe what they believe and maybe get frustrated by it. Because I think at the end of the day, it's all about continuing to learn and grow with that person, which is really exciting and kind of uncovers new things that maybe you didn't realize, you know, early on. So I hope that this just helps you to start to talk about questions that you really wouldn't come up naturally. And hopefully that helps you to grow a little stronger in your relationship and how you know one another.
Trying to develop mindsets and strategies that are going to help those younger couples have like healthier and more fruitful relationships and family lives, whether it's on other things we've talked about in prior episodes, or it's like this tool and this set of questions that could drive a discussion. I think this is an example of the kind of thing that we're trying to make Mr. Homemaker about, is like helping young people, navigate benchmarks and milestones in their relationship in a way that's going to be as beneficial as possible to them. If you watching and listening at home have found this to be stimulating or thought-provoking or helpful, then please like and share this episode with your significant other or friends or family who might benefit from it. And again, for each of these questions, each of these ties back to some conversation we've already had in a prior episode. So for if you're interested in additional and behind-the-scenes content, follow and engage with us on Facebook, Instagram, and at patreon.com. And share your thoughts with us in the comments below, or on Reddit, or at mr-homemaker.com. Until next time, happy homemaking.
Thank you so much for attending today's discussion with Mr. Homemaker. Please take this opportunity to subscribe, like, and share this episode with your spouse, relatives, and friends. We further invite you to access complimentary information and resources at our website, mr-homemaker.com. There you will also find links to join the discussion via email or social media. And please, support the Mr. Homemaker podcast and receive merchandise and membership benefits on patreon.com. Until next time, farewell.
I'm joined in this discussion by, I forgot what's your name? I'm looking down at my script. I am joined today. I get used to looking at you through this tiny little viewfinder over there.
Well, it's also weird because I'm like weirdly blinking because one of my contacts is bothering me. So I did like a Lucille style, like.
You did. I wasn't going to say, but go ahead.
So hopefully we can edit that part out, but if not, Arrested Development reference. How could you go wrong?
I'm saving that for blooper reel right there.
Okay.
Yeah. Go.
Go. You're taking a picture of me right now?
Yeah, I just want to remember this. Resolving conflict. What are you smirking about?
It's like I don't know where to focus, so I keep like looking forward, and I'm looking at you, but then I realize to the person that looks like I'm looking over there, and then I'm blinking too much, and then I feel like I'm in a safe house, so it's like am I trying to send a message to someone with my blinks, and then I'm focusing on my blinks, and just.
Why are you smirking at me?
I feel like as the answer, everybody should get a puppy because I'm that's how people.
Right, so you have to get home, have to walk the dog. Yeah. All right.
Okay.
Is that enough rambling
Next
on me for this?